Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Anthony Gazenza, and this is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I hope you are doing well. We are recording on our usual day, which is Wednesday, hump day. I hope everybody's getting through their week well at this point. There is a lot going on the NFL calendar, a lot going on with the Cincinnati Bengals, and we are so happy that you have joined us to talk about some of the things that are going on with the Bengals at this point in the year. Usually, this isn't the most busy of times for the Bengals, whether it's, obviously they're focusing on the draft and they're doing their due diligence there, but, there's been the NFL Combine and things of that nature, which obviously they're doing their homework there, but the Bengals are actually dabbling in some free agency, and we are going to talk about that as well as a number of different topics coming up on this week's program. And I might be joined by my usual co-host, Scott Schulte. He's got a sick child at home, so he's kind of juggling with that, and hopefully he can join us, but we'll see. But we're also set to be joined by Joe Goodberry. Many of you know who he is. He has been a Cincy Jungle contributor. He has been a contributor on the Bengals Wire through USA Today, and now he is with the new massive sports blog, The Athletic, and he is writing on Cincinnati sports, and he is set to join us tonight as well. Should be joining us just in a little bit here. Thanks so much again for joining us live. If you have questions, we're going to be taking some listener questions at the end of the program, but we've got a lot on tap. We've got a lot on tap tonight, and I can't wait to talk to Joe to talk about, his impressions about the NFL Combine, some guys who impressed, some other players that we might not be too familiar with that he has on his radar, especially for the Bengals. And so we'll be talking to Joe here in just a little bit. I guess we need to start off with some news and notes for the Cincinnati Bengals. And as I mentioned, obviously the NFL Combine has come and gone. A number of prospects worked out and had varying levels of showings at the Combine. I guess where we need to kind of start is, I suppose, Orlando Brown. And Orlando Brown, for those of you who do not know, is a massive tackle with the Oklahoma Sooners and is the son of a former NFL player of the same name, played for the Ravens, the Browns. And if my memory serves, Orlando Brown was a guy who was a very good tackle and actually had his career cut short because of a referee throwing a yellow, a penalty flag, got inside of his face mask and actually hit him in the eye and damaged his eye. But that's neither here nor there because we're talking about his son. His son was largely viewed going into the NFL Combine as a first-round prospect. Massive, massive guy, 330, 340 pounds, 6'6", 6'7", giant guy. And there was a little bit of a boom or bust label on him, but for the most part, I think everybody felt as if Orlando Brown of Oklahoma was going to be probably a first-round prospect it's a tackle class that's very, very weird this year. There's kind of some top-heavy guys. There are some guards who could play tackles potentially, and you don't normally see that. You usually see the reverse, tackles who could play guard at the NFL level. But, Quenton Nelson is a guy who measured out at tackle levels while being a guard in college. So, some people say it's weak. I guess it's weak from the sense that it's not top-heavy, but there's a lot of substance there. There could be a lot of solid players there. Orlando Brown is a guy that is very different. And for those of you, and I just kind of full disclosure here, I didn't watch a ton of the Combine. I just didn't. I watched some of it. Definitely kept the pulse on who was there and the news that was coming out of Indianapolis. And if you joined the show last week or happened to download it since, we had Rebecca Toback of SB Nation join us for about 15, 20 minutes on last week's episode, who was in Indianapolis and gave us kind of some initial sights and sounds there. And our program is on cincyjungle.com, but if you go there as well, there's a lot of interviews and things of that nature that Rebecca has put up on that site. So I urge you to go there to at least check out some of that, especially from some of the high-profile prospects and possible prospects that could land in the Bengals' lap come April. But Orlando Brown is a guy, he's kind of been there at mock drafts for the Bengals at number 12 overall. It's kind of been one of those things where some people love it, some people hate it. I wasn't a big fan of it. I thought that would be a bit of a reach. Then again, when you're coming off of 2 straight losing seasons, your offensive line is a mess. Sometimes you need to reach to shore up things. And if you remember back in 2002, when the Bengals were on the clock, they got totally scorched by Mel Kiper Jr. for grabbing Levi Jones, where they grabbed him because Kiper felt that they could have moved back, grabbed him, and, all of that thing. Well, now you look back at it, and Levi Jones was a pretty good pick for the Bengals where they selected him. He was a solid left tackle, fringe, alternative Pro Bowl player on the left tackle spot. So that wasn't that bad of a pick. But now you look at Orlando Brown, holy moly, what a weekend he had in the negative way in Indianapolis. Terrible in the drills, terrible in the 40-yard dash, terrible in the broad jump. And there were reports from Matt Miller, a prominent draft analyst, who, there were coaches that were going through the drills with him that had really gotten on him during the NFL Combine, which is kind of a rare thing in terms of, these are not guys that are their players. They are, college players that are looking to cement a career for themselves. And, that unfortunately for Orlando Brown, he had really, quite honestly, a historically bad NFL Combine performance. And now you look at him, and now there's questions. Obviously, first, I would think the first round draft status should be out of the question for him. But, now that the Bengals, they still seem to be committed to Jake Fisher, to Cedric Ogbuehi at the tackle spots, for better or for worse. That doesn't mean they aren't going to add a tackle of some kind, whether it's, a backup guy that can kind of come in emergency situations through free agency, or, a guy in the middle-ish rounds of the draft who could be a developmental type of guy. They did add Bobby Hart in free agency a few weeks back, and that could be an option there. But now all of a sudden, are we looking at sort of an Andrew Billings type of situation? Now, what I mean by that is Andrew Billings never had anything in terms of character or bad workouts or anything like that caused him to fall from a potential late first-round pick to a fourth-round pick. It's just a matter of the perception of teams thinking he's a two-down player, if that, and that caused him to fall because of his position and all of that down draft boards and into the Bengals' lap, really at the middle part of the fourth round a couple of years ago. So now are we looking at the same thing with Orlando Brown? It's you never want someone to do poorly at the combine. You never, these are young kids. They're in their early 20s. These are essentially their job interviews, if you will, and you don't want to see them do poorly. But Orlando Brown seemed very ill prepared for the NFL Combine, and his trip there was essentially a waste and really hurt his stock. Now, you can look at that, though, and you can say the flip side of the coin is Andre Smith. The Bengals still drafted him at number 6 overall in 2009. He was a guy that was basically, it became kind of a joke in terms of his workouts, his pro days, the shirtless workouts, and And all of that kind of became a joke and really something that has kind of been a little bit in NFL Combine and Pro Day lore, if you will. And so the Bengals still took a chance on him. Now, Andre Smith, you can argue, still had a solid career and is still seeking a job. The Bengals may even bring him back this year, this offseason. I don't think you would say Andre Smith, number 6 overall pick, his career path warranted that pick necessarily, but for the Bengals, he's played pretty decent football, and there's been a couple of years where it was definitely above average football. There's been a couple of years where it's been average, and there's been a couple of years where it's been below average. But my point is, the Bengals take chances on players like this, like Orlando Brown, who have tumbled, and I actually didn't really know too much about this before draft weekend, but Marvin Lewis has known Orlando Brown basically since he was born. He coached his father in Baltimore, or was on the coaching staff in Baltimore when his father was there with the Ravens. And so there's a connection there. And, for all of the things we talk about with the NFL being, a scouting league and, metrics and data and all of that, there is still a little bit of nepotism that exists in the league. And, if that's the case with the Bengals and Marvin Lewis, which we've seen it to be the case, then, maybe Orlando Brown ends up with the Bengals. I would not be a fan of the guy at number 12 overall, given the workout and his supposed tumble. But I mean, this is the same deal. We've seen it with Vontaze Burfict. Remember, his workouts were terrible, and all of a sudden he went undrafted, and the Bengals got him, nabbed him, and now he's been, yes, there's been major issues there as well, but he's been a Pro Bowl player for the Bengals. Who knows? Orlando Brown turned in a terrible workout at the NFL Combine. Probably will not go in the first round, maybe second, even third day type of guy. And, if the Bengals get him there, that's probably pretty good value. But they will need to be confident in their coaching and a new offensive line coach, Frank Pollock, in terms of developing him and his skills and making sure that these things on tape are not, things that will actually translate to NFL snaps and that sort of thing. So we're going to be joined by Joe Goodberry of theathletic.com. I'd really like to ask him his thoughts on Orlando Brown there. On the other side of the NFL Combine, there's Shaquem Griffin. And if you remember last week, we actually had a listener question on Shaquem Griffin. He is the young man who is a kind of an edge rusher / weak side linebacker. He played for Central Florida, and he's the young man who kind of was born with a birth defect where essentially doesn't have a hand. And talk about a guy who rose his stock. He used a prosthetic hand to go through the bench press. Now that is something easily given, and nobody would blink an eye. That is something easily for someone in his type of situation where they would say, yeah, I'm not going to bench press. But he had a prosthetic hand, and he cranked out 20 reps on the bench press, which is absolutely incredible based on, number one, that's just great for the position and his size. But number two, it's a great thing. It's a great feat given the quote unquote disability that he has. So good for him. He also ran incredibly fast, one of the fastest times ever for the linebacker group. So, a guy that was maybe viewed as a late day 3, maybe even undrafted free agent, probably boosted his stock to early day 3, maybe late day 2, depends. But a guy that probably will never be in every down. And again, we talked about this last week. I don't want to sit here and harp on the disabilities and all of that sort of thing, but probably not a guy who will be an every down linebacker and every down defensive player for an NFL team, just based on the disability, but potentially a great special teams player, potentially a guy that can play 1 or 2 downs on defense for you and do certain things very well I think I mentioned last week, in the last 2 seasons at Central Florida, he had something like 40 plus tackles for loss and 20 sacks, something I don't have it in front of me exactly, but something to that effect, which is very, very eye-opening, especially given the fact that he doesn't essentially have a hand. So, a guy that could come in on a defense. He's a little small, he's probably 225, 230. So it's a little small by NFL linebacker standards, but, could be a decent niche player. Put on a little weight for him, could, potentially give you a few more snaps than you think. But really a feel-good story out of the combine is Shaquem Griffin, and one we were asked about last week. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza. We are so glad to have you with us. We are we should be joined pretty shortly here by Joe Goodberry of The Athletic. And he's a new addition to their Cincinnati sports writing crew, and obviously he's kind of a draft guru, NFL draft guru, and I'm anxious to hear his thoughts on this. The other area of news and notes that I think we should cover is the Chris Baker signing. Chris Baker is a defensive tackle who had some productive years with the Washington Redskins. He's bounced around a couple of times through the NFL and a couple of different teams, that sort of thing. The Bengals on Wednesday, it was kind of a sudden thing, but the Bengals on Wednesday, they kind of brought him in for a physical and all that, and they tried to get a deal done. They signed him to a 1-year, I believe it's about a $3 million deal, and he should play the other defensive tackle spot opposite of Geno Atkins. Now, last year they had Andrew Billings. The Bengals had Andrew Billings, and they had Pat Sims kind of take over that spot. Pat Sims started some games, then Andrew Billings kind of got some time, and they're shuffling that. Now, Andrew Billings, I think we all agree, has some high upside. And, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, he was viewed as a guy who was a fringe first-round talent just a couple of years ago. Bengals got him in the 4th round, and then he kind of, his rookie season was a wash because of a knee injury, didn't get to play. Then last year he kind of started playing. There were flashes of some good signs. There were also flashes of not great play. Pat Sims is a impending free agent, and he's entering his 11th season in the NFL. So it's not like Chris Baker is a spring chicken himself, but he's a guy that, is a little younger, has a pretty solid track record in terms of getting after the quarterback and things of that nature in the NFL, and could be a good guy next to a veteran guy next to Geno Atkins. And then you rotate in Billings and Baker, and then you have Ryan Glasgow there as well. So you kind of have a little bit of flexibility. I think also what this provides is flexibility in the draft. There are a lot of talk of the Bengals potentially, and I think it was a recent mock by maybe Lance Zierlein or somebody from NFL.com that had the Bengals taking the University of Washington defensive tackle Vita Vea, who's a big, talented guy, and could play next to Geno Atkins and probably will be a top 10, top 15 type of pick in the draft. I don't want to say this completely wipes that option off the board, but when you drafted Andrew Billings a couple of years ago, you drafted Ryan Glasgow last year, you bring in Chris Baker as a free agent this year, I don't see defensive tackle being where the Bengals go early in this draft. And I mean, if you look at Marvin Lewis's track record as the Bengals head coach, he really likes that 3rd and 4th round in the draft to draft his defensive tackles. You look at Geno Atkins, 4th rounder, Pat Sims, 3rd rounder, Domata Peko, 4th rounder, Andrew Billings, 4th rounder, Matthias Askew, 4th rounder. I mean, it's those middle rounds where he can get a guy that is potentially an impact or a very good player. Maybe they are only a two down player, but what the Bengals do is they rotate in their tackles, and that's kind of their thing in their base defense. They rotate guys in, they kick in. You saw Michael Johnson last year kick inside from defensive end and be effective inside on passing down. So the Bengals kind of get creative a little bit up front. Now, Chris Baker is a guy who has Bengals connections, and not necessarily with, not a former player, but Jacob Burney was his defensive line coach at Washington at one point. Jim Haslett was his defensive coordinator, who's now the linebackers coach in Cincinnati, was his defensive coordinator in Washington a few years ago. And Chris Baker was a very good and fringe Pro Bowl player for the Redskins for a couple of years at the defensive tackle spot, just a solid guy. Now, unfortunately, he's getting towards the end of his career, and he is he was an undrafted free agent in 2009, so essentially he's really only one season younger than Pat Sims, but he is younger. He's about 2 years younger and will turn 31 about midway through the season. So, kind of a rental deal. And, of course, when it comes to Bengals free agency, we know the deal. Chris Baker was cut. So, Chris Baker will not count against the Bengals compensatory formula when they signed him. So that is something that obviously appeals to them. That's probably, we're going to see more of this as the Bengals sign quote unquote outside free agents. And that's just kind of part and parcel of their formula in free agency. And Chris Baker should be an effective player for the Bengals this year. Probably a guy that, like I said, will get a decent amount of snaps. But here's the thing, okay? The Bengals last year were uncharacteristically bad against the run. If there's one thing that Mike Zimmer preached, Paul Gunther preached, it's, you know what, we're gonna stop the run. There were times, especially in the playoffs, where that wasn't the case, and they were not able to do that. But for the most part, the Bengals were very highly ranked over the past, really since Zimmer joined the Bengals back in 08-09. The Bengals have been very, very good against the run. Last year, they were number 30 in terms of allowing yards per game. So, obviously, getting some help up front. The Bengals will probably look for some help in the draft, maybe free agency at linebacker. Kevin Minter is a free agent, didn't really work out last year for them. So middle linebacker is definitely a need. You'd like to think you can rely on Vontaze Burfict, but unfortunately, because of suspensions and a couple of injury issues, he's been in and out of the lineup. You don't know, but there are people I saw earlier in the I think it was Michael Myers when we before we kicked off the show here saying I'm kind of getting shades of Tank Johnson, and there are a lot of similarities here. Obviously, Tank Johnson was a guy who was a second-round pick and played some decent ball with the Bears before he got in some major legal issues. Came to the Bengals and really played pretty well in 09, not so great in 2010, and then both sides kind of cut ties there. But I think this is a low-risk, high-reward type of deal. Could the Bengals still address defensive tackle high in the draft? Potentially. That's definitely an option. I don't know if I see it at number 12. I mean, you look at Marvin Lewis's drafts, even linebacker, which is a big need, is not something that he really drafts. He has drafted highly with the Bengals. It's been quarterback, it's been wide receiver, it's been cornerback, it's been a couple of offensive linemen. So I just, you don't see defensive tackle and linebacker, which is ironic because those are a couple of the positions in which he built a championship team, a championship defense with the Ravens back in 2000. So it's kind of ironic that he hasn't really prioritized those positions in the draft. They've gone in free agency for a lot of those guys. I mean, you can name Nate Webster, Ed Hartwell, Sam Adams. All of these guys, a lot of which are Baltimore Raven retreads, but they, he kind of has preferred to get some of these free agent guys to come fill in these areas. And sometimes it's worked, sometimes it hasn't. And, usually it has helped short term, but we'll see. Chris Baker seems to be a guy that can help this team short term and, could be a force. If you look, by the way, go follow him on social media, pretty entertaining follow. And he seems to be just totally revved up to be with the Bengals and already saying, Gino and I are going to team up and be, amazing, blah, blah, blah. So you got to like that. I think I looked at his stats earlier today and he had, 1 year was about 6.5 sacks. And so he's not just kind of, even though he's about 320 pounds, he's not just a guy who just sits there and eats up space. He does make plays. He does make impact plays. It's just, it remains to be seen if he can do that at 30, 31 years old at this point. And if he can do it for a year, fine. That's okay. And if they can lean on him a little bit as Andrew Billings continues to develop, that's fine too. I don't have a problem with that. What I don't want, and I think a lot of people are in the same boat, is I don't want when the Bengals are struggling, when the Bengals are far under the salary cap, when the Bengals could use more help on their roster and they did not do more in free agency. I don't want to hear the excuse of, oh, hey, well, we did go in outside free agency. We got Chris Baker. That's not something that I think is something that the Bengals could rest their laurels on or should rest their laurels on at this point. And, but at the same time, the Bengals did do something in free agency before the kickoff of free agency, if you can believe it. And, Chris Baker's Bengal 1 year, about $3 million, and we'll see the impact there. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza, and I believe now I am joined by Joe Goodberry, who I have unfortunately harassed this evening in the past couple of days. I apologize, Joe. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me, Anthony?
Yeah, I can. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Sorry I'm late. I was on the couch with the kids. They were watching Star Wars, the Clone Wars, the animated series on Netflix. Next thing you know, I was falling asleep. So
no excuses. Got to play like a champion, buddy.
Yeah. They said, we're going to bed that night. I said, what time is it? I look. It's like, oh, no.
Well, I appreciate it. That obviously, I'm joking around, but that stuff comes first. And I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah.
First of all, man, congratulations. You have joined The Athletic, which is a to my knowledge, is a relatively new website and has absolutely exploded on the sports blog scene. And you are now one of their Cincinnati writers.
That's right.
So can you tell us a little bit about that, about the site and what you're doing for them?
Yeah, I'm writing about the Bengals, of course. And The Athletic, I think they started out in the Bay Area, California. And
yep.
Mostly baseball. I think they've been known to go hard at baseball writers, and they've got some good people over the last couple of years. But they expanded to Cincinnati this off season, and they contacted me and said they'd like me to write for the Bengals. And so far, it's been pretty good. And it's been going. It's about a month now, I'd say, on the 12th. So we're just getting our legs under us. But yeah, I'm trying to focus on player evaluation, and the stuff usually I try to keep in my wheelhouse.
Awesome. Well, was it Tim? Is Tim Kawakami one of the big guys there? He was at one of the newspapers in the Bay Area, and he kind of started this or something.
Yeah, he's one of them. There's a couple guys that are kind of behind the scenes that started the website, but yeah, they started off with some some big hitters from the Bay Area.
Awesome. Well, congratulations. Well deserved. You have, I think, in the 5 digits of Twitter followers, and well deserved. So I'm stoked you're joining us. I apologize I woke you up.
No, I shouldn't sleep that long. It's just sometimes I try to convince myself I only need 6 hours. Then your body says, no, I think you need a little bit more.
Yeah, you need 8. Well, I'm going to try and not put you to sleep again here. I guess let's just dive into it. I started the program. I talked for about 20, 30 minutes, a little bit about the combine and some guys, a couple of guys who impressed and didn't impress. And then, Chris Baker, who just signed on Wednesday with the Bengals. So I want to get your thoughts on that. But let's just start. I mean, there are a number of guys, both number 12 and in the second round. I mean, the Bengals could theoretically greatly improve their football team because they have a high pick yet again this year, a high pick in the second round again this year. I guess I don't really know where to start, but I guess Orlando Brown is where to start. He was a guy
Sure.
I talked about earlier in the program. Obviously, his father was a pretty solid NFL tackle, and there are ties to Marvin Lewis there. Awful combine. A guy who has been mocked to the Bengals at number 12. Is he off the table officially at number 12? And should he be a guy that might be even be available in day 3, like an Andrew Billings type of guy?
Yeah, I think he's definitely off the table. Based on reports, and I didn't really need the reports to tell me this. That combine and that performance, not only does it raise the questions because it's on tape that you say he's not a great mover, but he won a lot, and his tape's still pretty good because he's long, he's huge, he's athletic. I don't mean he's athletic. I'm sorry. He's strong, and he throws guys down, and he's a good run blocker, and he's a nasty guy. But then he goes to the combine. All the things you expected him to look bad in, he did. And not just that, he looked historically bad, like to the point where you question, is he working out? Is he doing any of these drills? Does he care to do these drills? Actually, I was watching NFL Network, and Sean O'Hara, who played in the NFL for a long time, said, yeah, he's a lot like his dad. I played one season with his dad. His dad didn't like to practice, didn't like to do the drills. He just wanted to play and hit people. And I'm like, oh, well, that makes sense why he's stinking up the combine right now. But, they know what these drills are. These aren't a surprise anymore. These guys are putting in work for these months to prepare for this and prepare for workouts with teams, prepare for their pro days. This is part of the process. If he's not involved in it, you have to question how much does he care and how much does he want to, play football and do the little things it takes to be great. We knew he had athleticism limitations, but at this point, you have to wonder about more than just that. And I think that's what teams are going to do. So as of right now, he was so bad that it takes further investigation to figure out what happened. And until then, until you have a concrete idea for teams, I think he's a day 3 pick, and he's a risky one still at that.
Yeah, DD Merritt in the live Cincy Jungle chat says Orlando Brown is likely to fall to day 3 after watching 3 of his games. The combine explains a lot of what you see. A massive, slow human with limited strength who gets in people's way. And it sounds like that's kind of echoing a little bit of what you're saying, just kind of a big guy, a strong guy, but
yeah,
not necessarily a great lateral mover, not really a guy that, he just relies on size and strength to win. And that, high school, college, that helps you. NFL, you're going to need it. And to be honest, and disagree with me if you want, Joe, I mean, the Bengals have done kind of both. They've done the massive guys like the Andre Smith guys, and they've done the project athletic guys, and neither have seemed to work of late, at least, So if the Bengals are going to go safe at offensive line, they probably, it's going to have to be the safest guy has to be Quenton Nelson in this draft, correct?
Oh, he's not only the safest, he's the best probably prospect in this draft. He's the Andrew Luck of offensive linemen, where he checks every single box from the tape, the production, the elite traits you want, the mentality, the physicality, nastiness, the length, the size, the strength. He checks every single box. If there was a chance for them to somehow move up and spend a couple of picks to get to that 8, 9, 10 spot to get him, no question in my mind is that the biggest impact they could make on this team this offseason by getting Quenton Nelson. Now, he's a guard, so there is a chance he's there at 12. I think it's very slim, but there is a chance. But if we're talking safe, it may be his teammate Mike McGlinchey at left tackle, because they're well coached in Notre Dame. That O-line coach is now the Bears O-line coach. These guys are pro ready. They've churned out a lot of good prospects the last 5 to 8 years at Notre Dame on the offensive line. I think McGlinchey is probably the guy that you would think is the highest floor, lowest ceiling kind of guy. But for the Bengals, that might be attractive because as of right now, you're starting Cedric Ogbuehi at left tackle again, and you don't want to do that, obviously.
Yeah. Talking with Joe Goodberry, now with theathletic.com and one of the Cincinnati sports writers with that website. Obviously, many of you who tune into this program know his work and know his takes on the draft and NFL prospects. He is at Joe Goodberry. He's done work previously with the Bengals Wire and USA Today and different types of items through Cincy Jungle throughout the years, and I'm stoked he's joining us. Joe, talk about Shaq Griffin, a guy obviously who has some physical limitations. He is a guy. I used to coach high school sports. Now, obviously not to the same level of college or pro, but that is a guy I would absolutely love to coach. A guy just by interviews and knowing who he is and all of that. Now he actually showed some of the physical side.
Right.
Did with a prosthetic hand, did like 20 reps on the bench, sub 4.40, I think.
Yeah.
One of the fastest times by a linebacker. How does he project in the NFL? I kind of say maybe a 1 to 2 down defender and a special teams player, even with those limitations. I hate to say that. I hate to point to that, but that's kind of the reality to me.
Yeah.
Am I wrong about that? Or did these numbers kind of prove, hey, I'm a 3-down guy and can play special teams? Or I don't know. What do you think?
His greatest limitation is his size, and it's not the hand, because on tape, honestly, people that don't have something or faced with a physical or even sometimes a mental limitation, they find ways to operate day-to-day things and do things that you wouldn't even think about. When you see him take on a block and shed it, normally you would use that other hand and pull someone up, maybe rip with the other hand. He just goes through it without using that step, without using that hand to grab or pull. Somehow he's able to work through it and just keep going. And it's amazing to watch. And his tape is actually pretty good. He's an athlete, tracks people down. He works well in space. He's a pretty good wrap-up tackler. I think the combine, what it did for him is he put on a little weight. And I think he played at less than 220 at college. And I think even at the Senior Bowl, he was under 220. And teams were playing him at defensive back, too, in the Senior Bowl. Because if he's 215 and he's running a 4.3, you could do that at safety, and that sounds pretty good. You're not going to need the shed blockers as much. You're not going to need that hand as much. You may to catch the ball or defend it, but he really didn't have any issues with that either. I thought he caught the ball better than some got linebackers with 2 hands. So the limitation for him is, where do you play him? Because he's kind of a tweener between a safety and linebacker. And if he's 235, that's fine, but he's not there yet. If he's 215, great. Let's drop him a little bit and play him at safety. But I think you're definitely getting obviously an awesome guy, a guy that you can't tell no to, and a guy that's going to find a way to work. And like you said, if you coach, he's a guy that if you installed something, you're going to have a couple guys that are, I don't know if that's going to work, or I don't know if I can do that. I don't feel like he's ever had that thought in his mind. It's, oh, can I do that? It's like, okay, I'm going to go get it done. That's what you need me to do. I'll do it. And I'll prove that I can do it. And I want that guy in my locker room. So I still think he goes day 3. I don't think he's a top 100 pick, unless you had some picks to maybe take a special teams guy that maybe you play into another role, or you had a role designed for him where you're going to have kind of a joker position with a linebacker that can maybe play also nickel corner / safety, a Derwin James type at Florida State, I would say. I think maybe that's where he's going to fit in the NFL outside of special teams, but it's more likely a day 3 pick, because I think he had one official visit at the combine. And when I heard that report that it was just the Seahawks, who his brother plays for, that threw up some alarms to me that maybe some teams still aren't taking him seriously. And if that's the case, he obviously will get drafted later than we would all like to see him get drafted.
Yeah, I mean, I've got about 12 years or so on that young man, but I mean, there are times where I'm like, I'm too tired to go to the gym. The guy uses a fake hand to put
Yeah.
up the bench 20 times. That's unbelievable.
I saw a video today where I want to say it was like 10 years old, and he was working out. He wasn't 10. The video was 10 years old, and he's in a garage trying to work out at home, and he's built all these contraptions and devices to give him equal leverage and equal, weight on each arm. And it's like, man, this guy went through hoops to work out and stay strong on that side of his body. And you're right, I can't.
Yeah,
I don't even want to go to the gym.
Yeah, he just wants it, and it's one of those guys that may never be a Pro Bowl player, may never be. He might not last in the league 5 to 10 years, but just a guy that you just kind of you pull for, and as a fan of a team, you kind of want him on your team. But it was good to see him do well at the combine. Now, Joe, there's been a number of names linked to the Bengals, both because of positions of need and otherwise. Who are some of the guys, whether it's positions that you think the Bengals need or just in general, who really helped their stock this past weekend and might have been under the radar to Bengals fans, and now might be kind of rising to the surface a little bit?
It's hard to say who was under the radar if we're talking 12, but I do think Tremaine Edmonds, the linebacker from Virginia, 6'5", 250, and athletic, but he's 19 years old, and it shows on tape because there's a lot of things still that I know, right? We're talking about a 19-year-old at this size. What's he going to end up at 24, 25, 26?
Seriously.
Yeah, he played in a 3-4 defense, outside and inside linebacker. You can see there's still some unnatural things when he's playing linebacker where it just isn't clicking. He doesn't always have that killer instinct, but the athleticism shows up, his length and his ability to shed blockers and keep guys off of him. And he's one of the best tacklers I've ever watched, especially speaking of form tacklers. For a 6'5" guy, he drops down to 5'9", 5'8", gets under blockers, gets under runners, and you don't move him at that leverage and at that point. It's really impressive. That's one thing I took away from him. Even though he's a big guy that's athletic, I came away thinking he is such a good tackler at a young age and at that size. He's firmly in the question for me. I wish we would have seen Roquan Smith finish his workout because I would love to have compared them together. I think they're different players, but at the same time, I still think Roquan Smith's a better linebacker. But I could see Edmonds being a Anthony Barr type, a guy who went to the Vikings and had a very good career as their Sam linebacker. I think Edmonds could fit in that. I think the Bengals could still use some big, strong, athletic guys in that second level. So at 12, if he's there, I think they'll consider it. Derwin James at the combine, I'm not sure they need a safety. I do like Williams, and I look at a lot of fans have said they just don't make enough plays. They don't create enough plays. I also blame the scheme and the way they would play so deep and move their linebackers up into the A gap. There was such a gap in between that second and third level. You're not in position to make plays a lot of times. We blame the Bengals linebackers and safeties and coverage a lot for stuff over the middle, but I think the scheme said, we're going to let you have that. And we're going to make these tackles. We're going to frustrate you and make you throw it downfield. We're going to frustrate you and make it the hard throws to the boundary, make them worth it for you. And I think in a change to Terrell Austin who was with the Lions, they're more of an umbrella type of defense where they're going to make you throw short and they'll come up and make the tackle, rather than the Bengals were kind of look like they're going to give pressure, back everyone else out. You're not going to beat us deep, and that left a void. So the change could help. I thought all of the Lions safeties played well and played above their ability. Didn't matter if they're bringing in free agents or drafting guys. So they always got production out of their safeties. So I still like the safeties for the Bengals. But Derwin James, the way he tested, the role he played at Florida State, where he played linebacker, nickel corner, he didn't do a lot of free stuff, but as a strong safety now in today's NFL, you're not asked to be just a Taylor Mays run stopper from 1995. You're a guy who's going to play the slot. You're going to cover tight ends. You're going to be in the box. Maybe even be a linebacker role in nickel. So he's cut out for that, and he's cut out for the future of the NFL as a strong safety. He tested off the charts. If they want to say he's our guy, okay, let's figure it out and see where he plays. And I'm cool with that for taking a high-end athlete. I think Vita Vea, the nose tackle from Washington, he could be in there. I think they want to upgrade the nose tackle spot, and then they signed Chris Baker today. So it kind of makes me wonder if they will back off that a little bit. At the same time, I think Connor Williams, while he's a name everyone knows from Texas, offensive tackle, he needed to show he had the athleticism and length to play tackle. I think when I was watching him, especially this past year, 2 years ago, the tape's really good. And I thought, here's a guy who's going to be a slam dunk top 10 pick whenever he gets there. He had some knee issues. He comes back. He didn't look the same. He looked 15 pounds heavier. He looked like he struggled with speed and agility off the edge. He looked much better on down blocks, run blocks. He's got some nastiness to him, but I kept coming to concerns with length and athleticism as a left tackle. He dropped weight, and he got to the combine. A lot of guys do that to run fast, but he looked much more athletic. He looked smoother, and I thought maybe he is a sub-300 guy. Maybe he is a 298, 295 guy, and that's okay if you play better at that range. He tested very well. His length was 33 inches on his arms, which is just borderline for tackles. You'd like 34 inches. The Bengals have drafted guys at 33 before plenty of times. Jake Fisher comes to mind. And so that shouldn't scare them away. I think he put himself back in the mix for that pick when I was thinking just within the last few weeks before that he's definitely a guard. Maybe he's a Zach Martin type guard from Notre Dame, a really good guy. I honestly think he's a good football player. And if the Bengals are open and say he's our left tackle and he doesn't work, they can play him at guard. I think that's a slam dunk for them because the Bengals have that ability to, need four guys on the offensive line, really. If he doesn't fail, or if he fails at one spot, you can move him to another. So I think he put himself back in the conversation. But I'd say the most underrated guy is probably Tremaine Edmonds that fans are just now starting to talk about.
Awesome. You talked a little bit about Vita Vea and Chris Baker. That was one of the questions I was going to go to, so I'm going to go here instead. Will Hernandez, I'm seeing some chatter in the live YouTube chat, and obviously our listeners want to hear your thoughts on him. To me, there are a lot of things about him, not only position of need, not only talent, but demeanor, nastiness. I mean, I've watched a little bit of tape on this guy, and obviously there's people like Mike Mayock who say this is the next Richie Incognito, just a nasty guy, and a guy that you want in the interior of your offensive line, probably a guy who will play and start in the league for 8 to 10 years. My question is, and I'm going to kind of two-prong this a little bit. Number one, will he be there in the top of the second round when the Bengals draft? And number two, can he play the right tackle spot? Now, before you answer, the reason I say that the second round pick, I don't know if, and I don't blame you if you didn't, but if you didn't read, I did a recent 4-round Bengals mock draft. Okay. And I want to get your thoughts. So I guess this is kind of a 3-pronged question. I had round 1, pick 12, Roquan Smith. And then in the second round, I had Will Hernandez. Third round, I had Jamarco Jones, the offensive tackle of Ohio State. Third, the compensatory pick had Luke Falk, the quarterback from Washington State, and then I had Tim Settle, the defensive tackle from Virginia Tech. Now, that was before the Chris Baker signing, so that may change now. But those are, first of all, I'd like your ideas. I'd like your thoughts on those picks, and number two, just your overarching opinion of Will Hernandez, because a lot of people in the YouTube chat are talking about him.
Yeah, first with your mock, I did one on FaneSpeak earlier today while I was on break, and it was very similar. I ended up with Roquan Smith at 12, and came back in the second round, and I want to say I took James Daniels, center from Iowa, but I also took Luke Falk in the 4th round, and a defensive tackle, B.J. Hill, instead in the 5th round. So I like where the path took you on that, and I'm in agreement. But with Will Hernandez, he wasn't there for me at that spot, but I don't think he's a tackle. With his 32-inch arms at the combine, that would put him at the 1% of offensive tackles in the history of the combine. So I think that's stacked against him, but not a problem. Bengals need a right guard anyways. If it wasn't for Quenton Nelson and how good he is, I think we'd talk about Will Hernandez. I think we'd talk about Isaiah Wynn from Georgia, to be honest. I think he's the second best offensive lineman in this draft. That 6'2" and some change is going to knock him. Teams just don't draft offensive linemen, especially tackles and guards at that size typically. So he's probably going to go in that 25 to 45 range too. I think that's where it is for Will Hernandez also. I love Will Hernandez on tape. He's everything you said. He's nasty. He's strong. He's a great run blocker. The Bengals, you can use all of that. not only were they bad last year and then really 2 years on the offensive line, they lacked any type of passion or aggression or ability to move guys. If you're going to be, a bad unit, a dumb unit, and they kind of were at times, at least be strong, at least be physical, at least move people in the run game. And they have not done that in a long time. I think Will Hernandez makes a lot of sense. A lot of people have brought up, and I agree with this, if the Bengals were able to trade back somehow, 10 picks even, 21, 22, Buffalo has both those spots. If they wanted to move up for a quarterback and so you were to finagle both those picks, you could do a mean facelift to this offensive line just right there. But, that just seems where the value is for these guys. If the Bengals don't take one at 12, Nelson, let's say he goes top 10, the Bengals don't take an offensive lineman at 12, I'm not sure where the next guy goes. It may be 16, 17, 18, 20. I feel like you'll have a run between 20 and 40 of 4 or 5 guys, from a couple of centers, Billy Price and James Daniels, 2 guards and Isaiah Wynn and Will Hernandez. You might get McGlinchey and Connor Williams in there at that spot, and maybe a Colton Miller from UCLA with his combine shoots up into that top of the second round. I think a lot of linemen are going to go in between 12 and 46. It puts the Bengals in a tough spot because, listen, I think if like I said, if it wasn't for Nelson in the top 10, if we just took away the value of tackle versus guard, because they all matter and the Bengals need all of them right now, I think Hernandez is the third best offensive lineman. I think Wynn's the second. I think Hernandez is the third. I think James Daniels is probably the fourth best lineman. I would take all those guys over the tackles. The problem is we still value tackle. You still know you need tackle. It's hard to get tackle. When you look at free agency, there's actual guards and centers you could pay this year and start, and that looks like quality signings. The tackles, you look at them and you go, Nate Solder, I guess, and he hasn't been good lately. He's had issues off the field. I don't mean criminal or anything like that, just things he's had to deal with.
Well, and who knows with the Patriots guys, right? I mean, right. In the Patriots system, they play well. When they go somewhere else, it's like, okay.
Right. You never know. And you look at the second tier guys or the third tier in free agency at tackle, and you're like, am I going to have to give this guy $8 to $10 million a year? And, he's barely played or he doesn't look good at all. So it's scary. So you get to the point where you're saying tackles are still overvalued. And because of it, the Bengals may have to reach or take a lesser offensive lineman at a more premium position. And like I said, on the question, I think Hernandez is probably a better football player, a better offensive lineman than that first group of tackles that are going to be drafted definitely before him.
And you think he could potentially play on the right side if needed?
Oh yeah, I wouldn't have a problem with it. I think he's probably even cut out for the traditional right guard is what I would think of power running and things like that. Yeah, he'd probably have no problem. He did it in the Senior Bowl. They moved him all over, so he looked like it was no big deal.
Okay. Talking with Joe Goodberry with theathletic.com, a Cincinnati sports writer with that website, just joined them. And Joe, I always tell you every time you come on, I'm like, hey, I need 10 minutes. I need 15 minutes. And all of a sudden I see the viewership spike. I see the questions spike, and I can't let you go. But I know it's late on your end, so I've just got a couple more questions for you, but I appreciate the time. You and I have kind of had a little tongue-in-cheek Twitter battle about quarterbacks in this year's draft.
Yeah.
And we saw really the only one that we saw a lot out of in terms of participating in drills this weekend were Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. Okay. Sure. And there were throws I saw Josh Allen. It's like, dude, that's a throw that's like 4 human beings on this planet can make, right?
Yeah.
But it's at the same time, like there's other things with Josh Allen where you're like, yes. Oh my gosh. So I'm all in on Sam Darnold. Okay. But I do admit that I think he is a major, especially because of his age. He didn't go back to school this year. Major boomer bust guy, but the boom is like boom, like a Brett Favre-ish type of boom. I just, the Bengals probably will not be taking a quarterback. You and I talked about our mock drafts that we recently put out. I think maybe a mid-round guy like a Luke Falk who's safe, good character, safe, productive in college, and, could maybe step in if the Bengals need a relief of Andy Dalton for injury. But just for the sake of argument, the big 5, right? Baker Mayfield, Lamar Jackson, Sam Darnold, Josh Allen, Josh Rosen. I think if I'm have read your Twitter correctly, you are a Baker Mayfield guy. But has anything changed from the combine because of that, or am I wrong in reading that, or your thoughts on all of those guys, the big five?
Right. It's a good class. I think in a typical year where maybe 2 or 3 of these guys weren't in this class, we'd be saying Jackson is a top 10 pick. I think it'd be a slam dunk that Baker is a top 10 pick. And I think we've gotten to that point where people are more coming around to that. Josh Allen should he be a top 10 pick? I think that's a question sometimes because there's a lot of things you don't like on his tape. There's a lot of footwork disconnect issues where he just doesn't look the same on every throw. I think a lot of his wow throws will really sell you because he has one maybe every 15 plays or so, a couple of game where you're just like, man, that's Dante Culpepper / Donovan McNabb type because he's got the legs and he runs.
Yep, he does.
And his arm is just insane. You saw those couple of throws at the combine, and that ball never came down. I mean, it's 70 yards in the air, and it's high. And on those deep throws, we see defensive backs all the time with terrible ball skills. They can't track the ball. A throw like that, they're falling on their ground. They're falling on the ground there. They don't know how to track that. They don't know how to make a play on it. They start panicking. They'll start grabbing on the receiver. I like just the idea of it. And I'm sure that's what GMs see too when they get excited. But there is a lot of issues in his game and a lot of inconsistency and he should have had better numbers at a lower program like that. And people say, well, he had a lot of drops or he had bad talent around him. When you go look and compare those numbers with guys like Jackson, guys like Mayfield, they had receivers drop way more balls than Allen did. And sometimes you see it's just the placement of the ball and the accuracy can make a big difference on catchability. We don't talk about catchability, right? You ever catch some guy's ball and you're like, man, it just made my hands flip a little, or it's a little too strong. And we're not NFL guys. We should be able to catch it. I mean, they should be able to catch it. But they started tracking in the Senior Bowl rotation per minute and velocity and arc on passes. And Allen's was wildly different than everyone else's. And, when they're brought up numbers from it, because they've had scouts do this at games and things like that, check in practices. And they're like, yeah, well, Baker Mayfield throws what these nerds are calling the most optimum catchable ball. And I'm like, that makes sense. Some guys are unexplainable. Why does he throw a catchable ball? The RPMs are just right. The velocity is just right. Just makes it easy to catch. Now, I'm not basing my whole evaluation off that. I just thought it was interesting. And I do like Mayfield. I do question some of the maturity things, but at the same time, I kind of like what he brings because the Bengals could kind of use a little bit of that energy and use a little confidence, couldn't they? You watch the games and the Steelers are beating their heads in, and you're like, man, someone step up, someone say something, someone do something, grab your junk. I don't care. Get some energy back on this team, and Mayfield would do that. So, and then Lamar Jackson is one of the funnest players to ever watch in college football. What he did is silly consistently. I mean, his wild plays are 1 in every 5. And because there's so many of them with his legs and silly stuff, Michael Vick stuff. You remember Michael Vick? That was fun, man. Early 2000s. And I think college players are just because the NFL game adjusted and the college game kept evolving. The college game is the most advanced and fun for concepts and the way they try things and new football stuff is in the college game. But the NFL has caught on to it, and they're preparing these quarterbacks, and they're fitting into the NFL game much more the way Mike Vick had to go for under center with the Falcons, and he had to, be in a West Coast rollout kind of game and throw a deep type of offense. Now we're all in the spread, and you got quarterbacks in the shotgun. RPOs are a big thing. We saw it in the playoffs and in the Super Bowl.
Foles, yeah.
Yes, with Nick Foles, a guy you don't even know that can run that well, but it doesn't matter. It's evening the numbers with the offense. It's putting your team in an advantageous situation every time. It's making 11 out of 11 instead of 10 versus 11, which it can very often be for NFL versus for offense versus defense. So for Jackson, he should fit in. There's some issues in his game. There's times where you see him throw a ball and you just go, why didn't you hit that? I've seen you hit that 10 times. Or why are your drop back or your footwork looks a little off or unbalanced. That happens. A lot of times that happens with athletes at quarterback because they know they can rely on their athleticism. But Jackson will sit in the pocket a lot and move within the pocket. There's some highlights of him versus Cincinnati versus North Carolina where he evades a rush, steps up, his eyes are up the whole time. We know as Bengals fans that is hard to find to get a guy to do that. And then he makes a deep throw on the money. That's like, man, just give me that all day. And you've already upgraded at the quarterback position. So, and I still like Darnold and Rosen. I do, because I like the upside. If I'm going to praise Jackson and Allen for upside, Darnold has the exact same thing. Like, there's a lot of in Darnold where you see him try just a little bit too much, get strip sacked and fumbled. There's a lot of plays though where I think he's mentally past those guys where he can, the pre-snap, post-snap for him isn't an issue, especially in the red zone. I just think he's a little too risky sometimes, and I think he gets a little Ryan Fitzpatrick-y where he's wants to make a play happen. Jameis Winston, I think, is a great comp for him because Winston doesn't know when to say no and take the sack. And I see a lot of that in Darnold where he's like, no, I can make this throw and I can make this big throw, or I can get out of this and just by another half second, this guy's going to come open, or I'll throw back across my body. But he's young, and I think he's probably going to get the opportunity to sit wherever he goes. Hopefully for a lot of these guys that get those opportunities. And maybe we'll see his upside in 2 years. With Rosen, he's probably the most able, ready to play right now. I think he's mentally there. I think he's probably the most pro-style offense. I do wonder about his injury history. He's had concussions. He's had shoulder issues. He tries to push the ball too much on plays that don't require it. And I think that has gotten him in trouble before with interceptions, especially. I saw his splits today for home and away, and his away stats, I think it's like 29 touchdowns, 20 interceptions. For college, you never get close to interceptions to touchdown ratio. And so it makes you wonder if, being at away games affects him with the crowd noise and being able to call plays at the line and things like that. So that made me want to dive into his tape a little bit more and see if there was anything like that. I love seeing stats home and away sometimes, or grass versus turf, especially for like pass rushers too, because sometimes you'll see pass rushers will be way more productive at home when they got the crowd noise because they can jump the snap. You go look at their away games and they don't show up on tape or on the stat sheet. So I thought it was interesting for Rosen. And one other point on Mayfield too, his production is so off the charts. The good chance that he's going to go to a worse designed offense in the NFL. If he goes to the Bengals, we know that it's going to be a worse offense than relays are. I think what they're running in Oklahoma is as good as you get for what to get production out of quarterback, especially at the college level. You may not get that same. He can sit in the pocket for 8-10 seconds at times. He's got running backs that are coming through there like crazy. The receivers have been good draft picks and NFL players. He's got a tight end this year. He's got more offensive linemen in the draft this year. He's been surrounded with talent and a great offensive design. Chances are he's going to go to a team that isn't built the same way. I think if Hugh Jackson drafted him, he could build a lot of that in there, but Jackson hasn't really implemented that in Cleveland the way he did in Cincinnati. So it's hard to say sometimes. Sometimes you don't see an offensive coordinator really blossom until they've got a full arsenal of talent around him. And so I think for the Browns specifically, they should probably take the guy with the upside. It seems like if they sign him, AJ McCarron, they can draft whoever they say. Darnold's got the most upside. I can sit him for 2 years. That's a nice match. And then you come out 2 years later, and Jackson's probably fired by then, but they got their quarterback.
Yeah, and probably one of those names I would think what the Bengals fans should get used to, and not because they'll be in stripes, but because they will probably be seeing them at least once or twice a year over the next couple of years, whether it's Rosen, Darnold, Jackson, whoever. Joe, just a few more, just like a couple more things before you get out of here. I asked this. We had Rebecca Toback, who was live in the Combine last week. We had her on the show last week. And one of the questions I asked her is, because she was there interviewing Duke Tobin along with the other Cincinnati media and the like. Is there any hope for you that even though Marvin Lewis is back and there's a lot of there's some coaching turnover in the assistant ranks, but is there any hope on your end that the Bengals will, I hate to use a stupid pun, but change their stripes in terms of free agency approach, in terms of maybe being a little more aggressive in the draft and moving up for a player to get, or do you think we're going to see more of the same?
I was hopeful when he resigned, because I guess I put this image in my mind and ran through it that Marvin went in there and said, all right, I'll come back, but we got to, get a practice bubble, and we've got to be aggressive in free agency. And if I don't want a John Ross, don't make me draft him. Give me a guy I can use, or whatever I dreamt up in my head. The farther away we got from that, I felt like, yeah, that's probably not what's going on.
Right.
And, I expect more of the same. And you know what really did it, well, though, is McCarron's grievance. And I think if he was restricted, they wouldn't be in position to really get a load of compensatory picks. Sure, you've got Tyler Eifert, but depending on his deal, it may not be worth a lot. They may wait to see what he would have gotten. Now you've got two guys, and because quarterbacks get paid, if McCarron gets if he gets $15 million a year out there, that's a third-round compensatory pick. They can't sign anybody at that point or risk losing a premium pick. And the way the Bengals operate, they're going to wait and say, okay, what's McCarron get? And if he gets that, okay, what's Eifert going to get? And let's say Eifert gets, a 2-year kind of incentive deal, but it's still $8 to $9 million based on incentives per year. That's a third or fourth rounder again. And they're going to say, yeah, we just can't bring anybody in that's really over like $4.5, $5 million a year. So that's a Kevin Minter type signing again. Chris Baker at $3 million, but he was released, so he doesn't count against it. But those are the type of signings I definitely could see them going for now. And I think the McCarron thing impacted it, because if he's restricted and they can keep him or trade him, doesn't impact their compensatory, offsetting what's coming in and going out, so they could play a little bit more. Here's the thing, though. The Bengals don't like to give out guaranteed money, even to their own guys, definitely not to outside free agents. And that takes you out of the market. It takes you out of being competitive in the offseason, in free agency. If you're a guy that's got offers from multiple teams and someone's offering you $20 million guaranteed and the Bengals are offering you $6-7 million guaranteed, but they say, don't worry, we don't cut guys early, you'll see all 3 years of your deal. That's basically their effective guarantee. How do I'll take your word for it, I guess, but that guaranteed money is guaranteed. You can say your 3 years are guaranteed in Cincinnati, but that $20 million is guaranteed. A lot of people use the Marvin Jones. The Bengals made a competitive offer, and Marvin said he got the same deal from the Bengals. I struggle to believe that, because he got 26 or 20 million guaranteed from the Lions. I forget what it was off the top of my head, but the highest guaranteed money on their contract right now, on their roster right now, is AJ Green at, I want to say, 26 million. Marvin Jones got 20. Atkins has 16 million guaranteed. Dalton has 15 million guaranteed. Dunlap's at about 12. Andrew Whitworth at the time was at 8 million guaranteed. I don't think they gave Marvin Jones 20 million guaranteed.
No.
They don't do that. So the offers may have been the same, but the guarantees, I bet, were different.
Yeah.
And at that point, if you're Marvin Jones, where are you going to go? What are you going to do? So I just think it takes the Bengals out of free agency. Whether that means they're cheap or not, we like to say that about Mike Brown. A lot of other teams, the Steelers do this. The Steelers are struggling to re-sign Le'Veon Bell because they don't give out that guaranteed money. The thing about the guaranteed money in the new CBA is, if you say this guy $25 million guaranteed, the owner has to write a check the day that's signed for $25 million and put it in an escrow account. And it has to sit in an escrow account for the life of that contract, or until all the guaranteed is paid out from, the first 2 or 3 years. I think for some of these low market teams, that's very hard for them to do. And I don't know if that, I think they've got 25 million sitting around. I just don't think they want to dig into it the way these big NFL teams or NFL cities or these owners with a lot of money can do it. And I don't think they want to. So I think Bengals fall in that category, and it's going to take them out of. People say, well, how about Andrew Norwell? Bengals have a need. He's from Cincinnati. He's a free agent. He's a good player. It'll never happen. They cannot pay him the $40 million guarantee he's going to get in free agency. They won't cut a check for it. They will not do it. I'm starting to wonder if they can do it. I know they probably have the money, but the way they operate makes me concerned that, they will ever be that competitive in free agency.
I totally agree, and I've said this not on the episodes you've been on necessarily, but because the Bengals rely more heavily on the draft, they now need, because they're not players in outside free agency and they rely so heavily on their picks, they need, and the fact that they have deficiencies in their scouting staff in terms of overall numbers comparative to other teams, they need to hit on players more frequently than probably other teams do. They just need to. This is Joe Goodberry, who is joining us on the program. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. Joe Goodberry is with theathletic.com and is one of their Cincinnati sports writers, and is kind enough to turn 15 minutes into about 30 to 45 minutes. Now, Joe, I'm going to get you out of here, and I'm going to do it in a way that I've never done so with a guest before, and it's going to kind of be a little bit of a lightning round. It's going to mostly be NFL/draft/Bengals questions. It's going to be like 4 or 5 questions. And then also, for those of you who follow Joe on social media, Twitter, Joe is a big video game guy, a big comic book guy, a big movie guy. So there's going to be maybe just a twinge of that here.
All right.
Just kind of quick answers. I'm going to kind of go quick. Quick answers from you, and then we'll get you out of here, okay?
Okay.
All right. Your best and number 1 overall prospect in the 2018 draft class is
Quenton Nelson. He's complete from top down, measurements to tape.
Thought so. The Bengals will take blank at number 12 overall this year.
Mike McGlinchey, the tackle from Notre Dame. They need a starter, and he's a plug-and-play starter.
Okay, I like it. As we sit here today, early March, not free agency totally kicking off and the draft taking place yet, what do you predict the Bengals' record to be in 2018?
Oh, that's tough. Assuming they, get some players in the draft that can play and maybe 1 or 2 free agents that can help them. 8-8.
Okay, that's safe. That's safe. It's very.
I wasn't going that way until I was like, 8-8 is perfect.
Yeah, safe. All right, lightning round has been shot to hell now, but that's okay. Your favorite under the radar or a late round guy in the NFL Combine, the NFL Draft, maybe even a fit for the Bengals. Your favorite guy?
Perry Nickerson. He's a corner from Tulane. He's about 5'10", 185. You won't find him on CBS's top corners. If you go to the list, he's not even listed. But he ran a 4.32 at the Combine. He's got incredible ball skills. He reminds me of Asante Samuel, the way he baits quarterbacks and receivers and understands route combos and is able to jump routes. I mean, this is how undrafted guys end up being good players all the time. I don't know where he'll get drafted. To me, he looks like a 2nd or 3rd round guy. I'd love to have him. The Bengals could probably take a corner in day 3, or at least they should. He's just a guy I think is going to be a good player. He's got all this ball skills and speed and agility and awareness. Sign me up.
Yep, just a small school guy. I saw that on Twitter, by the way, on your end. That was some impressive plays that I saw him make. Very athletic.
There's a few full games on YouTube. They're fun, and the highlights are even better.
Yeah. Favorite comic book movie?
Ooh, this stuff.
Overall. I know there's a lot. Come on now.
Spider-Man 3. And you may think I'm joking, but it's my.
I think you are joking. There's no way. Really?
I'm not joking. Here's why. The comic part of it and the story arc for Spider-Man and the black suit and Venom and all that is my favorite comic story.
Right.
So the adaptation movie is not great. Obviously, it's okay, but I like a lot of the little things and the things they did well and the things they took from the comics and cartoons that had that story that's been told a dozen times, and they didn't nail it. But because it's my favorite, story, I enjoy that movie, and we watch it more than most Spider-Man movies in my house.
Okay. Well, you heard it here. You heard it here first. Joe Goodberry really likes him some emo Tobey Maguire. So,
yep.
yeah. that dyed dark hair and the
dancing.
Yeah. Oh man, that was legitimately the one answer I didn't think I would get from you, but that's okay. I get it. Joe, I know you got to go to bed, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on here. Just real quick, how can our listeners, how can Cincinnati Jungle readers, how can they get your stuff on The Athletic? Do they need to sign up, or what happens with that?
It is a subscription-based service, but I would tell you that they always do promos and 50% off, 40% off, 30% off, whatever. Wait for those, check those links, and they're circulating all the time. Wait for one, hit it then. It'll cost you a couple bucks a month, maybe $20 for the year if you find one of those. If not, $40 for the year. We want to make it worth it, though. And it's not just Bengals, it's the Reds, it's Xavier, whatever you're into in Cincinnati, sports-wise, and it gives you access to all the other cities. So it's not just based on a city subscription. It'll give you sports from all over where they cover it. We want to make it worth it. We're not just going to write, Monday morning, this is what the coach said, yada, yada, or this guy had 260 yards. This guy, had a good game. Yeah. It's going to show you why. It's not going to be they signed Chris Baker to a 1 year, $3 million deal. It's going to be they signed Chris Baker to this much. this is how he helps. This is what he did with the Bucks. This is what he did with the Redskins. Here's some film clips. Here's some breakdowns of what he can and can't do, the impact that has on the roster, the impact that has on the draft. And if I can convey that all in 1,000 words, then it'll be worth it for you.
Awesome. We have Michael Myers in the chat room who had said, please, Joe Goodberry, start a Kickstarter account and buy this team, LOL. So
I think we could all pool. I wonder about that. I said that I made this joke on Twitter the other day, and I wonder if you could even come close to, 500 million. It'd probably be at least to get
kind of near the Packers public.
Right.
Yeah.
Like to even be a 51% owner, if the Bengals would sell for $1 billion, you'd have to get 510 million in there or something. Yeah. I don't know. It'd be a crazy amount.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on, man. And if there's anything that we can do to pump up the Athletic, or if there's a promotion you guys are doing, let me know. I'm happy to put it on the air and let our listeners and readers know. Appreciate the time. I know next time I ask you for 5 or 10 minutes, just plan on like a half hour. So
I already do anyways now.
I'm sorry.
No, you're right.
I'm sorry, man. But go get some sleep. Appreciate the time. And maybe if you want, quote unquote, 5 or 10 minutes after the draft on one of our shows, and you can talk about the picks. We would love to have you back on, man.
Yeah, if not right before the draft, so we can try and nail the last week down and give good insight, and then right after we can talk about who they drafted.
I mean, you're welcome anytime, my friend.
Thanks, Anthony.
All right, take it easy, man.
Bye.
That's Joe Goodberry, the draft guru and a gentleman who is now employed by theathletic.com for draft and Bengals analysis. Go check them out. Go subscribe to their stuff. Obviously, Joe puts a lot of stuff out on Twitter, but great stuff. Joe always brings it, and obviously a guy that we will be having back on the show in the future. This has gone on a little longer than I imagined, so we usually do listener questions. I'm going to maybe do like one. We've got a couple already that I kind of have in the queue. I'm going to try and get to a lot of them. Brandon Seaman, who is both in the YouTube chat and sent me an email a couple days ago talking about backup quarterback. I think, I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but I think both Joe and I talked about Luke Falk, the Washington State quarterback, in our mock drafts that we recently put out. A guy who, not flashy, productive, takes care of the football, good leader, good guy, kind of is, a little bit of the mold of Andy Dalton this year. And that's why I think he could be a mid-round guy. Not a lot of money, not a lot of draft collateral that could be invested by the Bengals. And just a guy, there are other guys, obviously. There's Mason Rudolph. There are other guys. We've talked about that on the program this year. To me, I kind of like that Luke Falk guy. And I like him in the respect that the Bengals are moving forward with Andy Dalton, the idea that they're moving forward with Andy Dalton as their quarterback, as their starting quarterback for at least 2018. And they need a guy like an A.J. McCarron, similar size, similar skill sets. Now Falk is about 2 inches taller than Andy Dalton, but he can kind of move a little bit like Andy can. Good guy, good leader, good, just not a wow guy. And I think that, if Andy Dalton were to, and one of his greatest assets is his durability, if Andy Dalton were to miss an extended period of time or a game or two, I think Luke Falk could be a guy that could come in, hand the ball off a handful of times, make a few plays here and there, and carry the team to a win. So I'm not, Brandon asked about Jeff Driscoll. Jeff Driscoll's great in terms of, doing some fun things in a project and developmental guy. Do you really want, in 2018, do you really want a guy like Jeff Driscoll who struggled in college and had to transfer from Florida to another school after, struggling in the SEC? Do you really want that guy kind of carrying the baton in terms of a starting quarterback position for the Bengals if Dalton were to go down? I don't know. I get the idea. I don't know. I'm not an anti-Driscoll guy, but if this is a team that, and it appears to be that, where they get guys that can help you now, and they need guys that can help you now, I just think, AJ McCarron is about as good as gone. So why not get a guy that's very similar to Andy Dalton, a guy you are committed to in Luke Falk? And, that could be a guy who could help you out in terms of getting a win or two. So thank you, Brandon. Thank you for tuning in to the live broadcast. Appreciate that. Nate McGuire kind of talks about a couple of different things. His question is, is trading Dunlap or Atkins away a good strategy? No. I mean, number one, even though, Atkins has had a number of Pro Bowl appearances in a row, and especially this last year, Dunlap, kind of the same deal. They're getting up there in age. And this is the whole thing with the Bengals. We talked about windows opening and closing for the Bengals throughout this program. And, 2015, it kind of, was that window slammed shut with that loss to the Steelers in the playoffs? Maybe, maybe not. But I just don't see the point of trading those guys aside from cap space, maybe. But, is this team really going to spend an outside free agency? No. And the guy they brought in on Wednesday, Chris Baker, decent signing. Okay. Nothing to light anybody's hair on fire, but a depth signing, a guy who could maybe potentially start for them, rotate up front for them, and could be somewhat productive. But, this isn't he doesn't count against the compensatory formula. So there aren't, there's talk on Wednesday of Joe Mixon lobbying for Sammy Watkins to come to the Bengals. That's never going to happen. And I hate to say that, but where the Bengals' priorities are is making sure you're not in salary cap hell and making sure that you don't affect that compensatory pick formula. That's just how it is. And, that's where their heads are at. And in terms of trading Dunlap and Atkins, really the only point at this point would be to shed salary and shed cap space. And I don't see it. And really, I mean, Atkins, he's now entering his 9th season. Dunlap, same. How much value are you really going to get for those guys, even though they have decorated careers? They're up there in age now and all of that. But kind of going back to what I said, 2011, 2012, all of a sudden, you've got AJ Green, you got Andy Dalton, this new quarterback. You've got, these, in 2013, 2014, these new running backs. You have Atkins, you have Dunlap, all these guys entering their primes of their careers. And all of a sudden, AJ Green, 8th year, Dunlap and Atkins, 9th year. I mean, it's just like, whoa. Same with Andy Dalton, 8th year. Number one, when you're a guy that's in his mid-30s like myself, it makes you really reflect on how fast time flies. But number two, it just kind of is like, wow, this team really kind of they've got talent. They kind of missed the boat. They really did. And hopefully, and that's I think what Marvin Lewis is hoping to continue with his tenure with the Bengals, his new 2-year contract. I think he is going to try and, get more years out of those guys, more productive years out of those guys. But I don't see the value in trading some of those guys. And, I call me old fashioned, I guess, if you want. You see Andrew Whitworth walk out the door, and to me, that's a guy who should never, even if it cost you more money to keep him than you would have liked to have paid, that's a guy who should never have walked out of the door. That's a guy who should have retired as a Bengal. And, some of these guys who are, especially Atkins and AJ Green, who are probably going to make the Hall of Fame at some point. These are guys who, should be guys that stay with the Bengals going forward and retire Bengals. That's just my thought. One more quick question we had on the Cincy Jungle thread from last episode was about the stadium deal that Mike Brown received, or the Brown family received, when they were built and granted Paul Brown Stadium. Obviously very favorable for their family in terms of tax dollars and all of that goes into that. Now, I'm not a politician. I'm not a venture capitalist. I'm not anything, I'm not very smart. But the question was, and I believe it was from Donald. Is there some sort of clause by the city or by the people who wrote up the contracts to say, Mike Brown needs to win X amount of games per year, or the team needs to be, performing at this sort of level in order for us to grant this loan or grant this possibility for them to get the stadium? To my knowledge, no. And I don't think, while that's a great idea in theory, I don't think that's really part of a lot of contract negotiations between cities and between NFL franchises, baseball franchises, that sort of thing. I think cities kind of feel, for better, for worse, a little fortunate that they have professional sports franchises that are there, that want to be there, that want to, plant their roots there. And, win-loss records, I don't think you can really contractually bind someone in that way. You could put that in a contract, but I don't think you would get, a team to agree to that. And there are so many variables that go into winning and losing games and winning and losing, teams over a season and all of that. There's too many variables I think that would go into that just don't, that it's not an obligation that is normally asked of professional sports teams when they come. Now, perhaps it's in Europe with other football teams or what have you. I don't know. And again, I'm not in law, I'm not in business law or anything like that. But to my knowledge, I don't know that the Bengals have negotiated some sort of or the city has negotiated some sort of clause. And it's just, to me, that seems to be very rare. I feel like that would be something that would be way more on the public forefront, way more on, in the public's knowledge if they were to, if that were to be part of the contract negotiations. I don't see it. I live in Southern California. Obviously, there's a stadium being built in Los Angeles for the Rams, and then the Chargers as well. I have not heard anything about the Chargers need to win X amount of games, the Rams need to win X amount of games, especially because they'll probably be hosting, unless they face off against each other, they're probably going to be having 16 home games there. So I haven't heard that, and I feel like I would have heard some sort of incentive type of thing or a clause in a contract at that point if that were the case. Unfortunately, because of where I live in Southern California, I don't have the plight or the tax issues that many Cincinnati residents have with the Bengals and their lack of winning. I root for the team. Obviously I want them to do well and, all kinds of things. I don't pay for that stadium directly because I don't live in that county. I don't live in Hamilton County. I don't live in the city of Cincinnati. So I don't have necessarily that sort of financial investment. I've been to games at Paul Brown Stadium in person. I invest in the DirecTV Sunday ticket. So there is a financial investment that I have, but I don't have that. And I understand why Cincinnati residents would be asking that. And kind of a subtopic, and I don't want to go way into it because we've done it before a little bit, but I'm very, very, very interested to see what the attendance will be for the Bengals, especially at the beginning part of the year. I mean, last year I think it was the second lowest since 2001 or 2002 or something like that. Not good at Paul Brown Stadium. And, this year they're not really doing a whole lot to really inspire a lot of confidence or a lot of, kind of light a fire under the fans to say, yeah, this team's going to be vastly improved. Granted, free agency hasn't totally started yet, and the draft hasn't occurred yet, so maybe that changes. Obviously, last year we had a little bit more of positivity about the Bengals when the draft occurred. John Ross, Joe Mixon, Josh Malone, all those guys didn't really do anything to help the team get past the hump. Maybe that helps push sales this year, but I just don't see a ton of interest in a fellow and where I got my start, a fellow podcast of ours, a fellow Bengals podcast of ours, with a number of different Bengals fans. They kind of said that they don't think that there's going to be a lot of people that will be selling out the stadium. Now, the blackout thing is something that has kind of gone by the wayside a little bit over the past couple of years, but obviously the Bengals are worried about ticket sales, and this team needs to prove that they are, going to be improved and going to play better football than they have over the past couple of years. And I think a lot of fans, unfortunately, including myself, are quite jaded from what happened in the 2015 wildcard game. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza. We unfortunately missed our co-host, Scott Schultze. He is helping his young son come back and nursing him back to health along with his wife. So big thoughts over to Scott's little one there. I hope they are all doing okay over there. Thanks so much for tuning in. We had Joe Goodberry from The Athletic, Cincinnati. He is a sports writer with that website, and he was talking about the NFL Combine, NFL Draft prospects, some Bengals stuff. So, like I said, I kind of joked. I said, hey, give me 10 or 15 minutes. It turned to like 40 minutes. But this podcast has gone on longer than I thought, but I think it's been a good episode, and we appreciate you tuning in. I don't even think I've said this yet on this episode. I usually say it a couple times per episode, but you can get this program on SoundCloud, on iTunes, on YouTube, at cincyjungle.com. You can also get in touch with the program via Twitter at BengalsOBI and via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. Please download. Please give us reviews. Give us your comments, compliments, constructive criticism, whatever. We love to hear back from you. I'm pretty stoked. We've had a couple of guests the past couple of episodes, even though it's been, this is kind of it's the off season, and there are parts where, you kind of hit a lull a little bit, but we've had two quality guests in back-to-back weeks and back-to-back episodes, and I'm pretty stoked on that. So I hope you've enjoyed it as well. Please get the program where you can. Again, Anthony Cosenza for the Orange and Black Insider. Get the program on a number of different mediums, and the combine's behind the in the rearview mirror, and we're moving on. We're moving towards the NFL draft. Pro days are ahead. A lot more news to come. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next episode, and Who Day, I guess.